Top 10 Movies of the Decade. I'm Henry Higgins and we're on episode 8 today, covering the movies of 2017. A lot of great movies in this list. Josh having more influence again on the selection, and we're coming close to the finale. 7 of the 10 movies for the final battle to crown the top movie of the decade have already been chosen. Today we're going to round that out to a lovely even 8 as we go through 10 movies from 2017. And to kick us off, let's start working through that puzzle with our number 10. John Kramer is back as the titular Jigsaw. And this is from the Spearig brothers, who I'm not very familiar with at all. It stars Matt Passmore, Callum Keith Rennie, Clee Bennett, Hannah Emily Anderson, Brittany Allen, and of course Tobin Bell as Jigsaw, John Kramer. And as much as a fan of the Saw series that I am, and I love the Saw movies, I can see where some of the faults are and where it gets a bit ridiculous at times, but I love the mythology and I love the idea of it. However, it became too bloated by the end of the previous movie. It was convoluted. Too many people were involved, where Jigsaw was supposed to be this almost mythical solo vigilante, but a really twisted one. This film strips things back to basics quite a bit, and I'm very thankful for it. And because of the back to basics approach they take, it is one of the best films in the entire canon. The first movie obviously will hold a lot of nostalgic love. It kickstarted everything, and it's a really good movie in its own right. And a few of the sequels kind of got lost with that, although they all have their strengths. The return of Tobin Bell as John Kramer in his full glory is wonderfully done. As an actor, he really brings a role of gravitas to what could be a two-dimensional villain. It could be really cheesy in the wrong hands, and he handles it in such a way that while you may not respect his methods, you do respect his reasoning behind what he's doing. In this film, the hook of the trailer was saying that John Kramer was somehow still alive. As you know, if you followed the Saw series, he actually dies at the end of 3, has an autopsy in 4, and his appearances from there are all flashbacks. So how was he up and about in this movie? And it's done excellently. The setup is great. The traps are brutal, especially the spiralizer. It's an instantly iconic trap and decidedly evil in its execution. But what I love about Jigsaw is a lot of his traps are dark reflections of the victims and their perceived failing in society. The best Jigsaw traps are the ones where you feel them. When you can see someone suffering and you could just imagine what that feels like. The crucifix trap from Saw 3 is a perfect example of that. And in this, it all comes together, and the twist, because all the Saw movies have a little twist in the tail, is brilliantly done, and it sets up a lot of excitement for me for when Spiral comes out. Now, it was meant to come out this year, but the coronavirus has obviously messed a lot of things up. For those unaware, Spiral is subtitled from the Book of Saw. It's a Chris Rock movie. He stars in it. He's behind it in regards to getting it off the ground, an executive producer. And it's interesting, after the success of Jordan Peele with Get Out, comedians, and Danny McBride with Halloween as well, comedians going into horror just seem to have hit a stride. And as I say, with Chris Rock taking the helm and having seen the teaser they've released for Spiral, I'm very excited for it. The idea of what that could be and when it's actually set is also interesting because time is played with expertly in all of the Saw movies. So I'm very excited for Spiral, and Jigsaw is a worthy kick-off to 2017 in at number 10. Sticking with horror for number 9, we have Happy Death Day, which is essentially slasher Groundhog Day. And that is such a cheesy B-movie premise. However, the director Christopher Linden does an amazing job with it. Jessica Roth is in it. It's the first thing I can remember seeing her in. I was so impressed. Israel Broussard, Ruby Modine, Rachel Matthews, Rob Mello are also in the movie. Essentially a cast of relative unknowns. And as I said, the premise is a horror Groundhog Day. So Tree Goldman, which is Jessica Roth's character, awakes in a stranger's bed after a hard night of drinking. She goes about her day. She's a bit of a bitch. She's sleeping with one of her college tutors. She's estranged from her dad. And then she gets killed by Babyface, who is the masked killer of this movie. She then wakes up reliving the same day. And at first she thinks the first go round we've seen as a dream, which she would do. And then she's killed again. And it goes on and on and on and on. And unlike Jigsaw, which had a lot of hype around it based on obviously the character and how much he's beloved in horror fandom, this came from nowhere. This had no hype to it at all, and it just came from nowhere to charm as silly. Jessica Roth is really charming. As I say, she starts out as a bitch, but she goes over and has a great character arc through the course of the movie. Her chemistry with Israel Broussard as Carter, the college student whose room she wakes up in, is excellent as well. The many deaths and Tree's growing realization of what's going on and what it means she can do is fantastically put on screen. Because if you knew that if you died, you are going to wake up and relive the same day, but you have the knowledge that you've already gained, like in Groundhog Day, and in Edge of Tomorrow, which we've spoken about in a previous episode, the keeping the knowledge as you wake up means you have knowledge of everyone else and what's going to happen during the day. You would have fun with that. For you, you know there's no real consequences because you're going to die, and then you're going to wake up again to relive the same day over and over. So you can pick up some skills, you can do some things, you can have fun, you can mess with people. And this plays on that really well, especially from a teenager's mindset. Babyface has a great look for a villain, and it's interesting how incidental the villain is to the whole overall story. The film itself has a tight pace and plot. It's very tightly scripted, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. Has a relatively short runtime based on movies of the modern day, and it brisks through things. Nothing seems to have been stretched and laboured out. The supporting cast are all on point as well. They made a sequel, Happy Death Day to You, which was also really well done. And it does a great job of explaining why the time loop was happening without it ruining things, which can happen. Sometimes you get an explanation for what's going on and suddenly things are... It makes no sense, it's convoluted, and it seems to have been shoehorned in. This isn't, and if you haven't seen the sequel, I would recommend you do so. But Happy Death Day, the first film, crashes through at number 9. So Happy Death Day crashes in at number 9. Happy Death Day is our number 9. Happy Death Day is our number 9. Our entry at number 8 is a landmark piece of cinematic history as well, as it marks the first time that a superhero movie is focused on a female central character. The lead character being a female in a solo movie has not happened. which is astounding when you think of how long we've had film and how long we've had superheroes. Many thought the MCU would get there with Black Widow, and it is due to come out, but DC got in there first with the Patty Jenkins directed Wonder Woman. It stars Gal Gadot resuming her role from Batman v Superman, and it also has Chris Pine as Steve Rogers, Robin Wright, Danny Huston, David Thewlis, Connie Nielsen, and Fiona Anaya. It's a period piece set during the First World War, which is an excellent time period to have this. Diana of Themyscira, who will go on to be Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, is brought up on the Isle of Themyscira, which is a woman-only isle. They're Amazons, that's what they are. And the world of man is a scary legend told to the children of Themyscira. Then Steve Rogers crashes his plane on their island from, obviously, air battle in World War One. That then leads her to go to the world of men, and she's the fish out of water. So it's essentially an origin story for how she became the woman we see in Batman v Superman. While Josh and I enjoyed Batman vs Superman, the DCEU needed a universally acclaimed, a critical hit on its resume, and Wonder Woman with Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot provided that hit. The supporting cast, especially Chris Pine, all shine through. They do a great job, which is essentially an ensemble piece for the most part. The World War One setting is great, especially for a woman venturing into the world of man for the first time. More so when you consider that she's been told man as a race is just violence. It's a violent history that man has. And it's not wrong. Every war in humankind has been started by a man. So with that, and then obviously the First World War and war in general has no man's land, that plays nicely into a scene in the movie which I was doubly impressed by, not just that they did it, but they avoided the I am no man type line, which would have been so easy to put in. It would have made sense for her to say that, but it still would have been cheesy and possibly taken you out of the seriousness of the situation. Because as much as this is a comic book movie, World War One isn't a joke. Danny Huston as Eric Ludendorff is excellent, and you get the feeling that he is Ares throughout the movie. Ares is the god of war, who was cast out by Zeus, and he has been influencing men for centuries since then. He's behind all of the wars. Not directly, he simply influences them in such a way that he plays on their worst fears, their worst impulses, and allows them to do terrible things. David Thewlis it's an amazing little twist that he ends up being Ares. And the way he obtains his armor, his comic book accurate armor and swords in this film, it's a mind-blowing touch of genius and incredible effects work. The Amazonians, especially Connie Nielsen and Robin Wright as Hippolyta and Antiope respectively, embody the Amazonian ideal. One is a mother, one as essentially her aunt, and the cool aunt at that who tells her these stories that are kind of hidden away from her by her immediate family. It also, which was touched upon in the opening of Justice League, that the Greek myths, or the gods at least, are not as mythical as you believe. Zeus exists, Hercules exists, Ares exists, so you have to believe all the other Greek gods exist. We know the Norse gods exist, which is where Thor and such like come in the MCU, so it's interesting that in the DC universe, they go with the Greek gods more. So it's another opposing ideology of similar characters. This is the first movie that objectively, across the board, many felt that the DCU got it right. Now, I loved Man of Steel. I really enjoyed Batman v Superman, enjoyed Justice League, but this for a lot of people was when they started to right the ship. Wonder Woman 84 is due out soon, relatively speaking. Obviously the pandemic and the cinema closures has really put a kibosh on when release dates are going to be kind of set in stone. I am very excited for Wonder Woman 84. As I record this, DC Fandom is just around the corner, so I'm hoping we get to see more footage of that, along with obviously a lot of other DC stuff. But with the trailers that we've had already, and the vibe and the 80s neon vibe and everything they've got, and Pedro Pascal seems to be having the time of his life as Maxwell Lord. Kristen Wiig as Barbara, who will become Cheetah. I'm really excited to see how they do her, if they give her a full transformation or not. If they do, I hope it's as accurate as they did it with Ares, with what they had to work with. And I have faith in Patty Jenkins, I have faith in Gal Gadot, I have faith in the supporting cast. We have the original Wonder Woman, and it swoops in here at number 8. Taking the number 7 spot is a movie by Matt Reeves, who is also likely to feature at the fandom event, as he is directing The Batman with Robert Pattinson, and I'm really excited to see if we get any footage from that movie at fandom. But for now, at number 7, it's his War for the Planet of the Apes, and all 3 of the rebooted Planet of the Apes movies have appeared in this countdown over the previous episodes and then this one, and for very good reason. Now, as I say, this is directed by Matt Reeves. It again stars Andy Serkis and Toby Kebbell as Caesar and Kobo, respectively. Woody Harrelson joins the cast, Steve Zahn, Karen Knoble. Terry Notary is also back as well. Ty Olsson, who's always worthy of a watch, and Michael Adamthwaite and Judy Greer's in the movie as well. The concept of what has been created in this, we're still in the prequel territory to the original Planet of the Apes movie. Taylor and his crew are still in space somewhere waiting to come back to Earth thousands of years in the future. But for now, we're in this prequel territory, and this is, as I said, this is the 3rd appearance for this reboot series, and it's a fitting conclusion to the entire trilogy. It's been mentioned each time we've done one of these films in the series, but Andy Serkis deserves all the acting nominations going. If he doesn't win them, he at least should be given a nomination. He should have been given an Oscar nod for Best Actor for his work as Caesar. He didn't get nominated for any acting gongs outside of the Saturn Awards, and that is a travesty. This isn't motion capture. As we've spoken before, they are capturing an acting performance by these characters. And Andy Serkis is just excellent as a weary, aging Caesar. And he is perfectly counterpointed by Woody Harrelson. He's a revelation as McCulloch. He's a colonel in like a paramilitary group, determined to wipe out the apes because his family got wiped out by this simian flu. And what they've found that it's starting to do to people is those that it doesn't kill, it regresses them mentally and also makes them mute, which ties in with how humans appear in the original Planet of the Apes trilogy, and why when Taylor speaks, it's such a shock. That's a fantastic little touch to link this to the original movies. The fight scenes are stunning in this film. There's some touching emotional moments between man and ape, man and man, and ape and ape. The whole thing is a fitting conclusion, and as a prequel to the main Planet of the Apes story, it draws to a close in epic style. And if they ever wanted to do actual remake of the original Planet of the Apes, this cast and this crew would be fantastic for it. I would be completely on board for a Planet of the Apes remake with these people. So now, if we are going to do that, in the comments below, who would you cast in the Charlton Heston role? Who would you have as Taylor? Who would you have as the lead apes from the original trilogy? And how would you change the twist? Or would you keep the twist the same? Tim Burton changed the twist, wasn't well received. Personally, I would keep it the same. How it would be executed, I would change. But the actual twist of it being Earth all along would... Well, it wouldn't... Would it be a twist? Because obviously we know. I personally would keep the twist in. I mean, it wouldn't be a twist at this point because we know. But for the characters, how it's revealed to that character would be astounding. And because we know it's Earth in this continuity, because we've seen the preceding movies, would you have the twist earlier in the film rather than keeping it right to the end? Would you have it be obvious that we're back on Earth? And the twist then could be not that the Planet of the Apes is Earth, but what caused the destruction. That could be the twist. Is there some kind of subversion going on? Who knows? So I would keep the it is Earth all along, but would I throw in a new twist? Would I telegraph it early? That's not for me to decide. That's for the creators to decide, but it's fun to speculate. So leave your comments below on how you would change the twist. If you would, what do you think the twist would be? Who would you cast in lead roles? And would you be up for this crew making a remake of Planet of the Apes? Swinging in at number 6, we are back in the MCU with Spider-Man Homecoming. And this was a highly anticipated movie. From John Watts in the director's chair, it stars Tom Holland as Peter Parker Spider-Man, Michael Keaton, Jon Favreau, Gwyneth Paltrow, Zendaya is introduced, Donald Glover, Jacob Batalon, Laurie Harrier, Tony Revolori. It has Bokeem Woodbine, Marissa Tomei, and Robert Downey Jr. reprising his role as Iron Man. This was a pivotal point in the MCU and Spider-Man. We'd already had the third modern big screen version of Spider-Man. We had the Raimi trilogy, which kind of lost steam at Spider-Man 3. We then had the Amazing Spider-Man duo, which I actually enjoyed. There were some really nice touches in there. And the tease for the Sinister Six and what they could have done with that would have been excellent as well, I think. But Sony, after the Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't do as well, decided to essentially rent out Spider-Man to the MCU. And it was a deal that almost collapsed last year, but they managed to salvage it, which we're all very excited about. And in this one, it was after Spider-Man was introduced in the MCU in Civil War, and he wowed everyone with his initial appearance. Tom Holland had to step it up as he headlined his first solo outing, and he succeeded in spades. The supporting cast, I mean, he's ably supported by Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, who kind of anchors things as the established link to the MCU. Marissa Tomei, who I've always thought was a fantastic actress, is excellent, is a younger version of Aunt May than we're used to seeing. Jon Favreau is obviously in there as well, which is another nice long link to the MCU, and he plays a mentor type role to Peter in the next Spider-Man solo movie as well. So that's some good setup for later. Jacob Batalon as Ned Leeds is excellent as his best friend. Zendaya as MJ was a nice little touch. She's not Mary Jane, so is she the MJ or is she a MJ? She has an amazing future ahead of her. Outside that, we have the villains. And Michael Keaton owns the screen every time he appears on it. From the 1989 Batman, he's always had this comic book fandom with him, and that is going to be returning soon because he's going to be in the DCEU Flash movie as the 1999 Batman. Now, is he going to be displaced from time, or are they going to have him as he is now, as an elder man? and he's been Batman for a very long time at this point. That's going to be an interesting thing to see. But in this, he absolutely owns the screen as Adrian Toomes, also known as the Vulture, who he's somewhat justified in his turn to crime, because he had a salvage operation. He got contracts from the city. He was a contractor. He salvaged and cleared up accident sites. And then obviously the Chitauri invasion left a massive clear-up operation, which he started working through. And then damage control comes in, takes the contract away from him, he's out in his arse. So basically, damage control destroyed his livelihood, so he had to supplant that in some fashion. So he becomes the Vulture. And he's the Vulture because he's scavenging things. That's what he was doing before. Now he's a criminal who scavenges things as well. They've managed to keep some of the Chitauri stuff that they had previously salvaged, and he has a crew which includes the Shocker and the Tinkerer. And the Tinkerer uses his knowledge to reverse engineer a lot of the Chitauri tech to create other weapons. There's also Crossbones gauntlets are in there as well. They've been modified, which is what Shocker wears, and Shocker 2 as well. And the whole movie is essentially a stripped down film in comparison to some of the other ones we've seen. Especially, obviously, he's your friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man. So this is essentially him being a neighbourhood crime fighter. It's small scale stuff. But it is small scale stuff that escalates at the right moments and features a standout. Peter Parker has these powers. He's fought Captain America. He's done the Civil War thing. So to go back to like low level crooks it's boring for him. But then the Vulture crashes the party, and at this point he seems out of his depth. Tony Stark has a fantastic line in the film that if you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it. And that is a lesson that he learned in Iron Man 3. So he's passing on his knowledge to Peter Parker. So Peter Parker gets the suit taken off him. He goes back to his homemade version of the suit, tries to tackle the Vulture, and the Vulture almost kills him. This leads to a standout believing in yourself moment. Because sometimes you forget, Peter Parker's a teenager, and in this scene, he is a teenager who is scared. Then he sees a reflection of himself, and in a scene lifted directly from the comic book panels, he essentially lifts a building off himself because he now believes in himself, which itself carries so much weight, so much emotion, as Peter Parker realizes that he is something without the suit. And that's quite the revelation. Standout scene, I think a lot of people agree with me on this, the standout scene in this movie isn't an action scene, although they are excellent as well. It's in the car when Toomes, because in this movie, MG isn't his love interest yet, he's actually dating Adrian Toomes' daughter, unbeknownst to him that it's Adrian Toomes' daughter, and he's being driven to the prom. And during that drive, Vulture slowly realizes who Peter Parker is, sends his daughter into the prom because he wants to have the dad talk with Peter, and then lets him know who he is. And Peter is scared, and it's such a well-acted scene. It is the right side of menace, but you also get a sense that Toomes doesn't want to kill a kid. He will if he has to, but he doesn't want to kill a kid. And you get a sense of so much in that short claustrophobic scene. The fact that Toomes isn't killed sets him up for future movies. With the post-credit scene of him in prison with Max Gargan, could be setting up a Sinister Six in this universe. Morbius is a movie coming out soon in the Sony side of things, but that trailer seems to show that it crosses over with the MCU. However, it seems to show more than anything before that there is a link to the MCU. Never more prevalent than the closing shot of that trailer, which shows Michael Keaton talking to Michael Morbius And it's never explicitly said that he is Vulture, but everyone has taken it that he is Vulture. He's in a prison outfit, and it just seems to be that's what's going on. There's also a Spider-Man graffiti on the wall that says Murderer, which is following on from the end of Far From Home. However, what's interesting there is the Murderer thing would follow on nicely from Far From Home, but it's the Raimi verse Spider-Man suit. So there's some mixed messages there. Venom 2, Venom There Will Be Carnage, is also coming out, and rumours abound that that is also going to explicitly cross over with the MCU. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. But with this, after 3 modern live action interpretations and versions, we have a Spider-Man that just works in every way. And Spider-Man Homecoming is a fantastic entry in the series. It's a fantastic piece of the MCU, and it's our number 6 movie for 2017. Number 5 is keeping us in the MCU, and this time it's the 3rd solo outing for our favourite Norse god. It's Thor Ragnarok. I have been mispronouncing this as Ragnarok a few times in previous videos. It's just something I've always done, even going back to the Mad Max 2, which had a club called Ragnarok as well. This is directed by Taika Waititi. It brings back Chris Hemsworth in the title role of Thor, Tom Hiddleston as his adopted brother Loki. They are always fantastic together. We also have Cate Blanchett as Hela, who is a revelation in this film. She plays it deliciously camp, but quite scary with it as well. Idris Elba is Heimdall. Jeff Goldblum is Jeff Goldblum as the Grand Master. Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie is excellent. Carl Urban, Mark Ruffalo, and Anthony Hopkins all make appearances in the film, and are all excellent in their various roles. This was a big film for the MCU, specifically because Thor The Dark World was considered a major disappointment. It regularly comes bottom of the rankings of the MCU movies. It's widely considered the worst film in the series. Had some good moments, don't get me wrong, but out of all of the movies, it's the one I have revisited the least. For that, they had to bring someone in, and they had to do something to change that idea that Thor and his solo movies are the black sheep of the MCU. And Taika Waititi completely flips the script with his balls out campus Christmas tone and script and way of doing things in this movie. And now Thor in a solo outing is generally considered to be one of the strongest entries in the Infinity Saga series. A good idea was essentially, for the most part, isolating the main characters from the ongoing Thanos Infinity Saga situation, making it a character piece that they could focus on this like bottle episode. If it was a TV show, this would be a bottle episode, with the incorporating of elements of the Planet Hulk story being a nice little touch. Marvel Disney can't do a solo Hulk movie at the moment. There's an issue with the rights with Universal, and it's a bit of a mess, really. So this is probably the best they could do, and this version of the Jolly Green Giant is hilarious at times. It's not quite Smart Hulk that we get in Endgame, but it is showing seeds of how that could come to pass. I mean, essentially in this film, Hulk is the strongest and angriest toddler in the universe. That's what he is in this film. Jeff Goldblum is just Jeff Goldblum. At this point in his career, he can just be Jeff Goldblum. That's why you cast him. And in this film, he is excellent in his role as the Grand Master with his little quirks and everything else. Another highlight is Loki, and Loki's always been great value, but Loki's reaction to seeing the Hulk the first time when he comes out in the arena battle is such a subtle nod to the end of the first Avengers movie, because this is the first time Loki has seen Hulk since then, and he jumping back in his seat and kind of squirming away without saying anything is great character development, as is his elation when Thor gets Loki'd and gets beaten around in the battle. His scream of "Now you know how it feels" it's like cathartic to him getting it out. He's probably recounted how it felt to Thor a number of times, and Thor hasn't listened, or Thor has just kind of brushed them off. And this was fantastic work from Tom Hiddleston. What was interesting is the actual the performance capture is the exact same motion for what Hulk did to Loki in the original Avengers movie. So that's a nice touch as well. It's just his go-to. So it looks like they just repurposed the original capture footage, which I think works here. Tessa Thompson being brought in as Valkyrie is also excellent and adds to the mythology. Carl Urban, who is one of the nicest actors we've ever met. We got a chance to meet him at Wales Comic Con, which I mentioned in the episode with Dredd. He's hilarious as Scourge. He gets a nice little character arc. Kate Blanchett as Hela, the goddess of death, just exudes awesomeness from her very first appearance. The tone of the movie is expertly fine-tuned from the opening confrontation with Surtur all the way through to the finale, which also ends with Surtur fulfilling his promise of instigating Ragnarok. Confrontation with the Immigrant Song, where Thor realizes his full potential as the god of thunder. He is not the god of hammers, is another excellent thing as well, and that whole final battle is just astounding. But for me, and likely a lot of other people, the actual highlight of this movie is a gentleman by the name of Korg. And Korg is just... everything he says and does in this movie is just excellent. He's played by Taika Waititi, he's voiced by Taika Waititi, and it's possibly the accent that helps as well. You see this big gruff stone monster with this gentle, playful, amiable accent, and everything he does and says is it's just awesome. I mean, seriously, there's a video on YouTube that's just Korg's lines in the movie. Every line that Korg has in the movie. And we go back to it regularly, Josh and I. We go back and watch it so much. So his immediate impact based on one movie appearance is astounding. And what we want, and we haven't had yet, is Korg and Louise from Ant-Man to get into a deep discussion in a future movie. Just to go over what's happened in the MCU so far, and just shoot the shit between them. That would be a great movie in its own right. However, bringing it back to the title character, Thor was redeemed in this movie. Everything about it is excellent. It also has a great cliffhanger ending, with Thanos' ship appearing as Asgard is destroyed. That sets us up nicely going into Infinity War and Endgame, and it also is a great reminder that as much fun as we had watching the events of Ragnarok, and the events of that movie, and how funny it was, and how comedic the characters were in all the right ways, there is still some serious shit out there, and Thanos is there to remind us of it, and it leads straight into the beginning of Infinity War. At this point, the jokes are over, Thanos is here, he has the Power Stone, and nothing is going to be the same again. This is the perfect TV show has funny episode before dark finale. And this again is why it was kind of a bottle episode. That's what we end up with. And for me, Thor Ragnarok is a movie you could go back to and watch again and again and again and again. The performances are excellent. And it's our number 5 for the year. Following it up at number 4 is a movie that kind of came from nowhere. It was getting a little bit of hype as it came up. And it's the return of M. Night Shyamalan with Split. James McAvoy in the title role, Anya Taylor-Joy, who will appear in New Mutants, which are finally getting a release this year. Betty Buckley, Haley Lou Richardson, Jessica Sole. It's a very intimate film, which is interesting because while it doesn't have many in the cast, it has a multitude of characters simply because of the character of Kevin Wendell Crumb and his multiple personalities. For me, Shyamalan gets an unfair rep. Some of his movies have fell flat. but some of the others are not as bad as you'd have believe. Devil, which he didn't direct but he did produce, it was supposed to be part of like an anthology series. Devil is a great film. Then there's also Unbreakable and The Sixth Sense before this as well. Those are excellent movies that for me still carry a lot of goodwill. The Village is actually a decent movie as well. But going into this one, there was still a lot riding on it. James McAvoy is mesmerising when he's on screen. Switching from personality to personality, he does such a great job of it that the viewer instantly knows which character he is, which personality he is, just by his body language, the way he holds himself, how he speaks, the slight change of accent, the slight change of speech pattern. He is phenomenal in this, and his transformation into the ultimate personality, the Beast, is terrifying. Probably enough possible real world science, biology, with comic book exaggeration to a slight degree to explain how it's happening and how the Beast can exist, but also in keeping with the comic book nature of the entire narrative that M. Night Shyamalan is putting together. The supervillain of this movie, the Beast, is one you could push yourself to believe could exist. And McAvoy does an amazing job when he is the Beast. Likewise, Anya Taylor-Joy has such emotional fragility in this film. She conveys overwhelming vulnerability in the role of Casey. Flashbacks to her time with her abusive uncle, gives context to her current day personality and how she is so withdrawn from everything, with her strength in overcoming the Beast in a surprising fashion as well, giving her the strength at the end of the movie, which is left ambiguous, it's left open, though by the time we get to Glass, you get an idea of what actually happened. But at the end of this movie, it's left open because her uncle is still her guardian at this point. She's been rescued, and then the cop in the car asks if everything's okay, and she smiles. That's her climax to this movie. The Beast escapes, so he is out there with all the other personalities as well. And there's a nice little climax scene with the three main personalities from James McAvoy explaining what they're going to do now. And then the ending, the actual ending to the movie, which caught everyone completely off guard, was when there's a news broadcast talking about this villain that's been nicknamed the Horde because of all the personalities. And then some woman in a diner pipes up and says, "Oh, didn't they give that crazy guy about 15 years ago a funny name as well? What was it?" And then you just hear Mr. Glass being said out loud. And you turn around, the camera pans around, and it's David Dunn. And then this confirming that this is part of the unbreakable world that he created in the movie of the same name. And to have that was awesome, and it made me so hyped for the third film that was mooted on the back of this. We now had a mythology, we now had an extended canon. David Dunn exists, Elijah Price exists, the titular Mr. Glass, the Beast exists. We now have a superhero and two different supervillains, one of power and strength and aggression, and the other one of restraint, who has no power, no strength, except his mind. So we now have two different extremes of supervillain for David Dunn to deal with. To say this is McAvoy's best acting performance wouldn't be a stretch. Obviously there are other movies, but I think with this one, because he's playing so many characters, and he exceeds this in Glass, but because he's playing so many characters and can switch on them in scene, so there's no cuts, doesn't like cut away and cut back, so he's had chance to get into the character. He switches between them in frame. It's an astounding work, and Glass was an extension of that. However, Split is our number 4 for 2017. However, you'll have to stick around for a future episode to see if Glass makes the cut. Reaching the podium positions for another year, we now have our number 3 movie for 2017. It's Logan. And this was an astounding achievement. It's from James Mangold, who did the Wolverine as well. From James Mangold, Hugh Jackman obviously returns as Logan Wolverine. Patrick Stewart's back as Professor X. Richard D. Grant, Boyd Holbrook is great. Stephen Merchant as Caliban, who was a character also featured in X-Men Apocalypse. And Daphne Keane as Laura, X-23, in her first main role, is fantastic. And it's essentially a standalone movie in the X-Men series, but it still acknowledges canon set up before it. It's basically a modern age western. The events of the previous X-Men movies have happened. This is set further along the lines. It has Logan as a broken down former hero whose accelerated healing is starting to fail him, and as such his adamantium coated skeleton is slowly poisoning him, so he is dying. It's a wonderful interpretation of this character coming towards the end. It's their version of Old Man Logan, due to the rights of characters and such. Like, they obviously couldn't do the Old Man Logan story, and there was no point in half-arsing it. So they've essentially got their own version of Old Man Logan. Hugh Jackman, his performance is essentially the character saying, let this just be over, I've reached the end. It's coupled with his angst at the world for what it's become. And it's easily Hugh Jackman's best performance as the character. Patrick Stewart is also in the movie as Professor Charles Xavier, and his portrayal is heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking performance. He is so convincing as this version of Charles, who is essentially, he's got dementia, and he is unable to control his powers. So what's it like when the world's most powerful psychic, who control other people's minds and such like, is now unable to control his own? It's a frightening prospect to have this type of mutant, an omega level telepath, have psychotic breaks, seizures, and suffer from dementia. It's genuinely scary. Boyd Holbrook is someone I hadn't really seen before in a movie, and he's great as Donald Pierce, who's like the chief antagonist of the series, as leader of the Reavers. Well, Daphne Keane as Laura, X-23, is just astounding. She is so feral in this movie. She has limited restraint because she's never had an upbringing. Then we also have X-24, which is Hugh Jackman playing a younger version of Wolverine. This is a version of Wolverine shown of any and all reason. He is simply what I believe Weapon X was meant to be when they were doing it, back when he had his adamantium coating. Because if you remember, if you watch X-Men Origins, which is canon, they were going to wipe his memory. So essentially he would be a mindless do I tell you type thing. And that's what X-24 is. And he is so brutal. The movie does a wonderful job of linking the X-Men movies of the past to the comic books that inspired them, with a fantastic nod to the exaggerated nature of the comics. It's just a line from Wolverine that these things happen but not as they appear here. The X-Men are actually in their comic book costumes. They are X-Men comics, but it's like comics that have been made of the X-Men's exploits after they did them. And as with any medium like that, things are exaggerated. The film is a fitting end to one of the most enduring movie comic book characters we've ever had. Hugh Jackman's obviously played him over so many years, and whoever takes his place when the MCU eventually does the X-Men and Wolverine again has an impossible task to try and follow Hugh Jackman in this role. I think they should go in a completely separate direction from what this was. But that's down the line. This movie has some nice scenes, but it's essentially a heartbreaking story. Why there are no more mutants, what happened to the X-Men, what's going on. The death of Charles Xavier had me close to tears for how it was done. However, what lifts you in this movie is one last berserker rage. Wolverine gets to go out in an R-rated orgy of slashing and stabbing that he deserves. After playing this character for so long, that final berserker rage is one that we all earned, and Hugh Jackman earned more than anyone else. It's the capper of the Fox X-Men movies. I know they did X-Men. I know they did X-Men Dark Phoenix afterwards. That was possibly the most disappointed I've been in a movie, a comic book movie, and we've got New Mutants coming up. But this would have been the perfect end to the whole thing. As it is, though, it's the perfect end to the original X-Men cast and stories. It's the perfect end for Logan. It's the perfect end for Hugh Jackman, and I thank everyone involved for giving it to us. Number 2 for 2017 is John Wick Chapter 2, and it sees Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves bring back the titular character. It begins after the end of the previous movie. It also has Common, Lawrence Fishburne, Ricardo Scamarcio, Ruby Rose is in it. Lance Reddick returns from the previous movie. Peter Stormare, who is always great value, as we've mentioned in previous episodes. Bridget Moynihan, Franco Nero, John Leguizamo, and Ian McShane all return from the previous movie as well. After the first movie came from nowhere to become this instant action classic, the second movie had a lot to live up to, and it also didn't have the element of surprise the first movie enjoyed. So for them to not only succeed, but expertly expand the in-universe world of the assassins and everything else was sublime. To say they succeeded is a ridiculous understatement. The world of the assassins, which was hinted in the first movie, opens up such a degree. You get an understanding of how everything operates and how deep they go and how much they've infiltrated everywhere. The new characters complement the returning figures. Lawrence Fishburne's Bowery King is excellent. He is a wonderful addition, and it's nice to see Neo and Morpheus reunited. Peter Serafinowicz and his character, the Sommelier, is excellent. He plays it so straight. It's just sublime, that character. And there's a wonderful scene, obviously, with them together where John's getting kitted out for his new mission. The action builds on what the previous movie had. Other characters from the previous movies get expanded roles. Sharon's another one who gets a slightly expanded role in this movie. Ruby Rose is excellent as the main villain's number one henchperson. John Wick gets to show off more of his action skills. The action builds on what the first movie did so well. With so few cuts, it really sells the aggression and the violence. The gunplay is excellent. The setup for how things would be is excellent. The way that it showcases that, yes, he reloads his weapons and how he overcomes the delay between reloading and being able to fire again is wonderfully done. And by using few cuts in the fights, the CQC, the close quarter combat fights, are so viscerally brutal in the scene, in the frame, that you are mesmerised by it. What they did so well was have this as an immediate follow-up to the first John Wick movie, and this sets up the third movie, which also begins where this movie ends. So it's almost like one long story for John Wick. It's expertly done. These movies have created a new iconic character. Keanu Reeves is astounding in the lead role. The John Wick Chapter 3 came out in 2019. John Wick Chapter 4, I think, was meant to come out this year, but it's coming out next year. And it's now filming back-to-back with John Wick 5, so it looks like we've got these characters for a while to come yet. But for us, John Wick Chapter 2 is number 2 for 2017. So after I've extolled all the virtues of John Wick Chapter 2, what could possibly top it to be number 1? The answer to that is very simple. It's another horror movie. It's a movie that, like some of the other ones before, came from nowhere. I mentioned it earlier in the video when we were talking about Jigsaw. It's Jordan Peele with his cinematic debut, Get Out. To say this is excellent just doesn't do it justice. Daniel Kaluuya in the lead role is fantastic. Alison Williams in the lead female role is also excellent. She essentially has to play two characters. Bradley Whitford, Caleb Landry Jones, who was in X-Men First Class, is awesome in this as well. Stephen Root and Catherine Keener. The idea of a comedy writer, someone who's known more for their comedy, coming in to do a horror, was one that a lot of people were sceptical of until it came out. And as I said earlier, this has led to Chris Rock coming into the Saw series. It led to Danny McBride being involved in masterfully rebooting the Halloween series. So, looking back, it obviously kick-started a new movement. This, however, didn't have that luxury. Horror is an easy genre to make a movie in, but it's a hard genre to make a good movie in. Jordan Peele knocked it out of the park with his first attempt. Daniel Kaluuya is great as Chris, the lead protagonist, while Little Ray Howery is a revelation. He's a delight as Chrissy's best friend and TSA agent extraordinaire, Rod Williams. The other supporting characters are all excellent as well on their roles, that for the majority of the running time require multiple nuances to display who these characters are to the public and behind closed doors, depending on what the scene requires at that particular time. Another thing that they inject in here is a thing called the sunken place, which is where when you're put in a trance, that's where you're sent. That is a terrifying prospect, and they do it on screen fantastically well for the sense of isolation and fear that it would instill in someone. The entire premise is just far-fetched enough to be implausible, but also contradictorily plausible. Plausible enough that you could, if someone said that it happened, you could believe it. There are some genuine scares. Some of them played for terrifying effect, some of them played for laughs, but that and the overwhelming tension all combine to make an excellent horror debut. The entire spectacle of what's going on, the subtle little things, the revelations, what you can see, what you can pick up, what's going on, and how that is an allegory for some things happening in real life. It's an astounding commentary on race relations and how we view each other, and it's done in such a way you can't help but walk away from the film thinking things over and over and over. Part of me wishes they had gone for the original scripted ending of the movie, but overall I'm kind of glad they went with the one that they actually chose. Chris needed some catharsis after all he'd been through, and Get Out is an example of what you get when you take someone who is mostly known for their comedy and give them the reins to a horror situation. As mentioned earlier, this is one of the reasons why the Halloween 2018 movie worked so well as far as I'm concerned. It's also why I have high hopes for Spiral from the Book of Saw with Chris Rock running things. The entire idea of Get Out is a subversion of how suburbia works, and as I say, it's a commentary on race relations. It's also one of those movies, once you know the twist and everything else, when you look back at certain things that are done and said in the movie. For example, earlier when Chrissy's girlfriend is defending him from the racist cop, you see it at first that she's simply defending her boyfriend from a racist cop by saying you don't need to see his license. However, when you get further into when she was going on, the reason she was actually doing it is if the cop had seen his license and there was a record of it, they would know where Chris was and they could track him from there. And when they take over his body, which is what they're trying to do, there would be a history of him being in the area. So what she's actually doing is protecting herself and her family. And you don't realise that until you get further in the movie. So when you watch it a second time, you're picking up on different things. Get Out is an amazing horror movie. I genuinely believe it's the reason why we're getting a new Candyman film. I think this kickstarted an entire belief in black horror where the black characters are the leads, the saviors, where the black characters can also be the villains, like in Us, where the black characters aren't just token, where there's black directors, there's black writers, black producers, and I'm all for that. To me, a great movie is a great movie, and everyone should be represented behind the scenes, behind the camera, in front of the camera, in a respectable way. And if Get Out is the movie that kickstarted all of that, I'm very thankful for Jordan Peele for doing so. Get Out is an excellent movie. It's an excellent horror movie. It's an excellent commentary on today's social climate. It's an excellent thriller. And for me, because Josh hasn't seen it, he's not old enough, it is the best movie of 2017. We have 8 movies in the final episode. We only have 2 episodes left, one for 2018 and one for 2019. Which movies are going to complete our top 10? Tune in for the next couple of weeks for those episodes. But for now, Get Out is number 1 for 2017. Please leave your comments below on how you feel about that. Is it placed too high? Would you even have it in your list at all? What movies do you think we haven't mentioned deserve to feature in a top 10 for 2017? Which movies do you think we have included here have no right being here? How would you switch them? Would you move anyone in the top 10? Please leave your comments down below. Leave your suggestions for future videos along these lines. I am looking to be doing a retrospective on what I believe is the best year for movies ever, which was 1984. However, that's an idea for another time. Leave your suggestions below. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for taking your time to watch this video, for hopefully having stuck through the entire series. We'll see you again next week for 2018. Keep yourself safe, wear a mask. By the time this is up, I hope you've enjoyed DC Fandom. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.